The sky over the river Kiontar tore open with a sound like tearing metal. Purple lightning struck the clouds. It was not a storm. It was a wound in the world. A massive ship made of flesh and tentacles fell from the stars. It was a Nautiloid. It belonged to the Mind Flayers. These monsters ate brains and turned people into slaves. But today, the hunters were afraid. The ship was burning. It spun out of control. Inside the ship, the Mind Flayers screamed with their minds. They tried to steer the dying beast. They failed. They had captured something they could not hold. They had tried to infect a prisoner who was too strong. The prisoner was not an elf or a human soldier. He was a warlord from the stars. The ship hit the ground near the beach. The impact shook the earth for miles. Trees snapped like dry twigs. A cloud of dust and smoke rose up to block the sun. The river boiled where the burning metal touched it. Silence followed the crash. It was the heavy silence of death. Then the fire started to crackle. Survivors crawled from the wreckage. They were hurt and confused. They coughed in the black smoke. They looked for weapons. They looked for friends. But they stopped moving when they felt the pressure. The air grew heavy. It tasted like ozone and old copper. A static charge made the hair on their arms stand up. The Mind Flayers are smart monsters. They share a single mind. They realized too late that the new prisoner was dangerous. When they tried to put a parasite in his brain, the parasite died. It burned up instantly. The mind of the prisoner was like a sun. It was too hot and too bright. Now the ship was down, and the prisoner was free. A golden light pierced the dark smoke. It was not the light of the sun. It was the light of a soul that burned with ancient power. A figure walked out of the broken hull of the alien ship. He was huge. He stood much taller than a normal man. He wore armor made of gold. Every plate was crafted with perfect skill. Eagles and lightning bolts were carved into the metal. A red cloak hung from his shoulders. It did not move in the wind. He held a sword that was covered in flames. The fire on the sword did not flicker. It was steady and hot. The survivors fell to their knees. They did not want to kneel. Their bodies just did it. It was an instinct. It was like a dog seeing its master. The Mind Flayers who were still alive tried to attack him. They sent blasts of psychic energy at his mind. The attacks hit an invisible wall and vanished. The golden giant did not even look at them. He simply walked. Where his boots touched the ground, the sand fused into glass. He was life and death in one form. He looked at a Mind Flayer crawling in the wreckage. The alien looked up in terror. It knew it was looking at a predator. The giant raised a hand. He did not chant a spell. He did not use a wand. He just pushed his will onto the world. A bolt of pure white lightning struck the alien. It did not explode. It simply ceased to exist. There was no ash. There was no smoke. The monster was just gone. The giant looked at the horizon. He saw the city of Baldur's Gate in the distance. He saw the chaotic magic of this world. He saw the disorder. He did not smile. He did not speak to the survivors. He began to calculate how many soldiers he would need to take the city. He was not a hero. He was the emperor, and he had work to do. The golden figure stood amidst the burning wreckage of the Nautiloid. The heat was intense. It did not bother him. His armor hummed with a low sound. It was the sound of power systems coming online. He checked his internal chronometer. It was broken. He was outside of known time. He was outside of the Imperium. This was a tactical disadvantage. He needed information. He needed a map. He looked down at the sand. A small creature crawled near his boot. It was a brain with legs. It was an intellect devourer. It hissed at him. The creature sensed the immense psychic power in the man. It lisped. The emperor did not swing his sword. He simply projected a thought. The thought was a command to stop. The creature froze in midair. Its biology failed. It fell to the sand as dead weight. The Emperor stepped on it. The crunch was loud. He began to walk west. He needed to secure the perimeter. The crash site was now his territory. He found a woman trapped in a pod. She had dark hair and wore chainmail. She was pounding on the glass. He analyzed her. She was human. She was also a half-elf. Her genetic code was mixed. In his empire, this might be tolerated if she was useful. She carried a frantic energy. He looked at the console of the pod. It was alien technology. It was biomechanical. He placed his gauntlet on the wet, fleshy controls. He did not hack it. He overwhelmed it. He sent a pulse of electricity from his armor into the machine. The pod shrieked and opened. The woman fell out. She gasped for air. She looked up at him. She was terrified. She reached for a weapon she did not have. The Emperor looked at her. He spoke for the first time. His voice sounded like grinding stones. He told her to stand. She stood. She did not want to obey, but her legs moved on their own. He asked for a status report. She stammered. She said her name was Shadowheart. She said they had worms in their heads. The Emperor narrowed his eyes. He focused his psychic sight on her skull. He saw it. A small tadpole was wrapped around her brainstem. It was Xenos biology. It was trying to change her, but it was dormant. It was waiting. He also sensed something else. She carried a box. It was an artifact. It radiated a strange energy. It felt like a prison. He reached out a hand. Shadowheart tried to pull back. She could not. He took the box. It was a prism. The moment his gold-plated fingers touched the metal, the artifact hummed. It recognized him. It did not attack him. It went silent. It was afraid. He handed it back to her. He told her she would carry his equipment. She was now a serf. She tried to argue. He turned his head slightly. The pressure in the air increased. She fell silent. She followed him. They moved further down the beach. The sun was bright. The water was clear. It was a deceptively peaceful world. The Emperor noted the local flora. He saw herbs that could be used for medicine. He catalogued them. He needed to build a supply line. Suddenly, a figure burst from the bushes. It was a pale elf with white hair. He held a dagger. He moved fast. He was a vampire spawn. The Emperor knew what vampires were. They were parasites. They were mutants. The elf, Astarion, tried to tackle the Emperor. It was like a child running into a tank. The Emperor did not move. Astarion hit the gold armor and bounced off. His dagger snapped against the ceramite plating. Astarion landed in the sand, stunned. His wrist was broken. The Emperor looked down. He saw the hunger in the elf's eyes. He saw the tadpole in his brain too. The Emperor grabbed Astarion by the neck. He lifted him one-handed. Astarion clawed at the golden gauntlet. It was useless. The Emperor squeezed slightly. He told the elf to cease his struggle. Astarion went limp. He realized he was outmatched. The Emperor dropped him. He told the elf to fall in line. This was not a request. It was a conscription. Astarion held his broken wrist. He looked at Shadowheart. She looked back with wide eyes. They realized that they were not companions. They were subjects. The group moved on. They found a purple rune on a rock. A hand stuck out of the stone. A voice cried for help. It was a man stuck in a magical portal. The Emperor despised uncontrolled magic. It was dangerous. It led to the warp. It led to chaos. But he needed assets. He grabbed the hand. He pulled. He did not use magic. He used raw physical strength. The rock cracked. The magical field shattered under the force of his pull. A man in robes tumbled out. This was Gale. Gale dusted himself off. He began to introduce himself with fancy words. He talked about wizardry. He talked about Waterdeep. The Emperor held up a hand. Gale stopped talking. The air left his lungs. The Emperor sensed a bomb. There was a ball of dark energy inside Gale's chest. It was unstable. It was a weapon of mass destruction. The Emperor told Gale he was a walking hazard. He ordered Gale to stay 10 paces behind the group at all times. If the energy spiked, the Emperor would terminate him to save the others. Gale turned pale. He nodded. He understood the logic. They reached the ruins of an old chapel. It was made of stone. It was defensible. The Emperor decided this would be his first command post. He saw a hole in the ground. It was an entry point. He heard voices inside. There were bandits. They were discussing loot. The Emperor did not sneak. He did not use stealth. Stealth was for assassins. He was a conqueror. He walked to the edge of the hole. He dropped down. He landed on the stone floor below. The impact cracked the foundation. The bandits turned. There were 5 of them. They held swords and bows. They laughed. They thought he was just a knight in fancy armor. They were wrong. The fight lasted 3 seconds. The Emperor moved with a speed that the human eye could not track. He was a blur of gold and red. He punched the first bandit. The man's chest collapsed. He was dead before he hit the wall. The second bandit fired an arrow. The Emperor caught the arrow in midair. He threw it back. It pierced the bandit's shoulder. The Emperor drew his sword. The fire on the blade roared. He swung once. The remaining 3 bandits fell. Their weapons were cut in half. Their armor was cut in half. The room was silent. The smell of ozone filled the air. Shadowheart, Astarion, and Gale dropped down into the room. They saw the carnage. They saw the precision. The Emperor was already checking the supplies. He found food. He found water. He declared this location secured. He explored the rest of the ruins. He found undead warriors. There were skeletons with scribes' tools. They woke up. They attacked. The Emperor destroyed them with efficient strikes. He did not waste energy. He crushed skulls and severed spines. He reached the back of the tomb. A sarcophagus opened. A skeleton in golden robes appeared. It was a lich. It called itself Withers. It asked a question about the value of a mortal life. The Emperor did not play riddles. He looked at the lich. He recognized a functionary. This creature was not an enemy. It was a recorder. It was a bureaucrat of death. The Emperor told the lich to record this. The master of mankind had arrived. Withers nodded slowly. He said he would wait at camp. He vanished. The Emperor accepted this. Teleportation was a useful asset. The group left the ruins. They had supplies. They had a temporary base. But they needed more. They needed an army. They walked towards a grove of trees. The Emperor heard shouting. He heard the clash of steel. He marched towards the sound. He saw a wooden gate. It was a primitive fortification. On top of the gate were tieflings. They were horned humans, mutants. The Emperor frowned. Mutation was usually a sign of corruption, but they were fighting defensively. Below the gate, a group of humans and goblins were fighting. The goblins were small, green, and chaotic. They were Xenos. They screamed and charged. The humans at the gate were retreating. The Emperor stepped onto the battlefield. The ground shook. Everyone stopped. The goblins looked at the golden giant. They thought he was a god. They were half right. The Emperor did not draw his sword this time. He raised his bolt gun. He had retrieved it from the wreckage. It was a massive firearm. It fired explosive rounds. He aimed at the goblin leader. He pulled the trigger. The sound was like a cannon shot. The goblin exploded. There was nothing left but mist. The other goblins panicked. They broke formation. They were not disciplined soldiers. They were a mob. The Emperor advanced. He fired again and again. Each shot was a kill. He did not miss. The humans at the gate opened fire with crossbows. They helped clear the field. A goblin warlock tried to cast a spell. He threw a ball of acid. The Emperor simply walked through it. The acid sizzled on his armor but did not burn it. He reached the warlock. He backhanded the creature. Its neck snapped. The battle was over. The silence returned. The leader of the humans, a man named Aradin, walked up. He was arrogant. He spat on the ground. He demanded the gate be opened. The Emperor looked at Aradin. He saw a lack of discipline. He saw a man who would flee in the face of true danger. The tieflings on the gate opened the doors. They were afraid of the goblins, but they were more afraid of the Emperor. The group walked inside the hollow. It was a refugee camp. The Emperor analyzed the situation instantly. These people were weak. They were frightened. They were poorly led. They were low on food. They were a burden. But they were also humanity. And humanity belonged to him. He would not save them because of kindness. He would save them because they were his property. He needed to mold them into a workforce. He needed to fortify this grove. A tiefling named Zevlor approached. He was the leader. He looked tired. He asked if the Emperor was a mercenary. The Emperor did not answer the question. He asked for the tactical layout of the grove. He asked for a manifest of all weapons. Zevlor was confused. He explained they were refugees, not soldiers. The Emperor stated that they were now soldiers. There was no room for civilians in a war zone, and this was a war zone. Zevlor tried to protest. He said they just wanted to leave. The Emperor pointed at the sky. He pointed at the smoke from the crashed ship. He explained that the enemy would come. Running was not an option. Digging in was the only logic. He walked deeper into the grove. He felt a disturbance. It was magic. Wild, uncontrolled nature magic. He found druids chanting. They were trying to complete a ritual. They wanted to seal the grove off from the world. The Emperor analyzed the ritual. It was isolationist. It was cowardly. It would cut off resources. It would deny him the assets inside. He walked into the circle. The druids shouted at him to stop. A woman named Kagha stepped forward. She was angry. She had a snake around her neck. She told him to leave. She said outsiders were not welcome. The Emperor looked at Kagha. He saw fear disguised as anger. He saw a weak leader making a desperate choice. He did not shout. He spoke calmly. He told her that the ritual would stop. He told her that isolation was death. The Imperium did not hide behind walls. It expanded. Kagha ordered her bear to attack. The bear roared. It charged. The Emperor stood his ground. He projected his will again. He used his psychic presence to dominate the animal's mind. The bear skidded to a halt. It whined. It lowered its head. It sat down. Kagha gasped. She stepped back. The Emperor told her that her authority was revoked. He was assuming direct command of the grove's defense. He turned to his companions. He gave them orders. Lae'zel, the Githyanki woman he had found in a cage earlier, was told to inspect the tieflings for combat readiness. She grinned. She liked this. She respected strength. She went to drill the refugees. Shadowheart was told to catalogue all medical supplies and organize a triage center. She obeyed. Gale was told to study the druid's idol. He was to determine if it could be used as a weapon or a power source. He was not to cast spells, only to observe. Astarion was told to scout the perimeter. He was to report any movement. He was not to feed on the locals. If he did, he would be executed. The Emperor set up his headquarters in the stone chamber near the grove's entrance. He sat on a stone bench. It was not a throne, but he made it look like one. He closed his eyes. He reached out with his mind. He could feel the tadpoles in his subjects. They were wiggling. They were communicating. He pushed back. He created a mental shield around the grove. It was a barrier of pure will. It quieted the alien voices. The people in the grove felt a sudden headache, and then relief. The buzzing in their minds stopped. They did not know why. They only knew the golden giant had arrived. Night fell. The grove was quiet, but it was a disciplined quiet. The refugees were not crying. They were sharpening sticks. They were boiling water. They were following orders. The Emperor sat in the dark. He planned. He knew the goblins were just the first wave. The true enemy was the Absolute. He had sensed the presence behind the tadpoles. It was a false god. The Imperium did not tolerate false gods. He would find this Absolute. He would burn its temples. He would crush its armies. And he would claim this world for humanity. He heard a noise. A small tiefling child approached him. She held a cup of water. She was trembling. She offered it to him. He looked at the cup. It was dirty. The water was brown. He took it. He did not drink. He placed it on the table. He looked at the child. He told her to return to her unit. She ran away. He looked at the map he had drawn in the dirt. He marked the location of the goblin camp. Tomorrow, they would not defend. Tomorrow, they would attack. The strategy was simple. The best defense was total extermination of the enemy. He stood up and walked to the edge of the grove. He looked out at the darkened forest. He saw eyes glowing in the dark, more intellect devourers, more spies. He raised his hand. A beam of golden light shot from his finger. It incinerated a bush and the creature hiding behind it. The message was clear. The Emperor was watching. The forest went silent. Even the crickets stopped chirping. The apex predator was awake. The Emperor considered the Githyanki, Lae'zel. She was an alien. In his own galaxy, she would be purged. But here, her knowledge was vital. She knew the enemy. She knew the cure, or she claimed to. He would use her. He would use them all. They were tools. If a tool broke, he would replace it. He felt a pang of hunger. His body needed fuel. He opened a ration pack he had found on the Nautiloid. It was tasteless paste. He ate it mechanically. He did not care about flavor. He cared about calories. He cared about efficiency. He thought about the chaotic magic of this world. It was wild. It was everywhere. It was in the air. It was in the blood of the people. It was a threat. He would need to build a dampening field. He would need to teach them the Imperial truth. There were no gods. There was only science and logic. The gods of this world were just powerful entities from the warp. They could be killed. He had killed gods before. He would do it again if they interfered. He checked on Gale. The wizard was staring at the idol of Sylvanus. The Emperor sensed the hunger in the wizard's chest. The orb wanted to consume the magic. The Emperor sent a telepathic warning. Do not touch. Gale flinched. He stepped back. He looked around, terrified. He realized the Emperor was always in his head. There was no privacy. There were no secrets. This was the price of survival. The Emperor returned to his stone bench. He rested his hands on his sword. He did not sleep. He entered a trance state. One half of his mind rested. The other half ran simulations. He calculated the probability of a goblin assault. He calculated the structural integrity of the gate. He calculated the loyalty of Shadowheart. The numbers were acceptable. The variables were manageable. The conquest of Fyron had begun. The first day was over. The casualty count was 0 for his forces. The enemy casualty count was 23. It was a good start, but efficiency could always be improved. He would demand better tomorrow. He would forge this ragtag group into a legion, or they would die trying. There was no middle ground. only victory or death, and the Emperor did not know how to die. The dawn of the second day brought no warmth. The sun was merely a source of illumination, not comfort. The Emperor stood at the gate of the grove. He was inspecting the defensive line. It was pathetic. The tieflings were tired. Their eyes were hollow. They had not slept well. The fear of the goblins kept them awake. The Emperor did not offer them coffee. He did not offer them hope. He offered them work. He ordered the construction of a trench line. The soil was hard. The tools were rusted. It did not matter. Digging gave them a purpose. Digging kept them from panicking. He checked the supply stores. Shadowheart had catalogued the food. It was insufficient. If the siege lasted more than a week, starvation would begin. The Emperor calculated the caloric needs of the camp. He cut the rations in half immediately. A tiefling mother cried when she saw the small portion of bread. The Emperor did not look at her. He was looking at the horizon. Survival required discipline. Discipline required sacrifice. The crying woman was a variable. If she caused unrest, she would be removed. He gathered his strike team. Shadowheart, Lae'zel, Gale, Astarion. They looked exhausted. They were not space marines. They were mortals. They had biological limits. The Emperor ignored these limits. He ordered them to move out. They were leaving the grove. The defense was static. Victory required momentum. They needed to cut off the head of the snake. The target was the goblin camp to the west. They walked along the river. The path was littered with debris. The Emperor walked in front. He did not tire. His armor weighed hundreds of pounds, but his stride was consistent. Every step was measured. Gale tried to ask a question about the Emperor's sword. The Emperor silenced him with a glance. Silence was tactical. Noise attracted enemies. They reached a broken bridge. On the other side stood a woman. She was red-skinned. She had one horn. She was covered in scars. Smoke rose from her skin. This was Karlach. She was raging. She held a great axe that looked like it had been ripped from a tank. The Emperor stopped. He analyzed her. She was a tiefling, but modified. Her chest glowed with a mechanical heart. It was an engine. It was crude technology, likely of infernal origin, but it was powerful. Will, the warlock who had joined them at the gate, stepped forward. He wanted to kill her. He called her a devil. The Emperor put a hand on Will's chest. He pushed the man back. The Emperor approached Karlach. She growled. She was ready to fight. The Emperor did not draw his weapon. He looked at her engine. He spoke in High Gothic. He identified the engine model. It was a prototype. It was overheating. Karlach was confused. She expected a fight. Instead, she got a technical diagnosis. The Emperor told her she was running hot. She would explode in 3 days without maintenance. He offered a trade. He would stabilize her engine. She would serve in his vanguard. Karlach looked at the golden giant. She looked at Will. She dropped her axe. She accepted. She was a soldier. She knew a commander when she saw one. The Emperor adjusted a valve on her chest with his fingers. The metal groaned. The heat vented. She took a deep breath. She was now asset number 6. They continued to the blighted village. It was a ruin. The houses were burned. The windows were dark. The Emperor smelled an ambush. He smelled unwashed bodies and fermentation. Goblins. He signaled the squad to halt. He pointed to the rooftops. Lae'zel nodded. She understood. She moved to the left flank. Astarion moved to the right. The Emperor walked down the main street. He was the bait. A goblin appeared on a roof. It shouted an insult. It fired a bow. The arrow hit the Emperor's pauldron. It shattered. The Emperor did not break stride. He raised his bolt gun. He fired a single shot. The goblin's torso evaporated. The ambush was triggered. Goblins poured out of the cellars. They were screaming. They were disorganized. The Emperor stood in the center of the kill zone. He was a lighthouse of violence. He used his sword. He did not swing it wildly. He used precise, chopping motions. A goblin charged his leg. He kicked it. The goblin's skull collapsed. He spun. He decapitated another. His movements were economic. He was not fighting. He was working. Karlach joined the fray. She was different. She laughed. She swung her axe with wild abandon. She set things on fire. The Emperor noted her lack of discipline. It was inefficient, but effective for shock value. Gale cast a spell. He threw a bolt of fire. It hit a barrel of oil. The explosion shook the ground. The Emperor projected a thought to Gale. Contain the blast radius. Do not damage potential resources. Gale swallowed hard and nodded. The village was cleared. The silence returned. The bodies were everywhere. The Emperor ordered them to be piled and burned. Disease was a greater enemy than goblins. They found a gnome tied to a windmill. The gnomes were being tortured. The Emperor released the brake. The windmill stopped. The gnome was grateful. He offered gold. The Emperor did not take the gold. He took the gnome's map. Intelligence was the only currency that mattered. They moved west. The sun began to set. The air grew colder. They reached the bridge to the goblin camp. It was heavily guarded. There were wargs. There were ogres. The Emperor assessed the threat level. A frontal assault was viable, but costly. He needed to preserve his assets. He chose a diplomatic approach, not because he respected them, but because it allowed him to position his forces inside their walls. He walked to the guards. He did not sneak. He simply radiated authority. The goblins felt the pressure of his mind. They assumed he was a true soul. They assumed he was sent by the Absolute. They opened the gate. They bowed. The Emperor walked past them. He did not acknowledge their existence. Inside the camp, it was a festival of filth. Goblins were drinking. They were fighting. They were eating roasted meat that smelled like dwarf. The Emperor felt a disturbance. It was the artifact in Shadowheart's pack. It was vibrating. The presence of so many infected minds was triggering a reaction. They entered the shattered sanctum. It was an old temple of Selûne, now defiled. The statues were broken. There was blood on the floor. The Emperor felt the presence of 3 leaders: a goblin priestess, a drow paladin, a hobgoblin warlord. He needed to eliminate the command structure. He approached the priestess, Gut. She was old and wretched. She offered to brand him. She wanted to mark his flesh. The Emperor looked at her. He saw the corruption in her soul. He saw the warp taint. He told her he required a private audience. She agreed. She led him to her chapel. Once inside, the door closed. Gut tried to probe his mind. She tried to use her tadpole to command him. It was her fatal error. She touched a mind that was a fortress of iron and fire. The Emperor did not even blink. He reversed the connection. He flooded her brain with a single image. The golden throne, the scale of it, the suffering of it. Gut's eyes rolled back. She began to bleed from her nose. She collapsed. Her brain had short-circuited. The Emperor stepped over her body. 1 leader down. Silent. Efficient. He returned to the main hall. He signaled the squad. They moved to the hobgoblin. Draw Ragslin. He was trying to speak to a dead Mind Flayer. He was using necromancy. The Emperor hated necromancy. It was a violation of the natural order. He walked up to the throne. Ragslin demanded respect. He asked who the Emperor was. The Emperor answered. He said he was the master of mankind. Ragslin laughed. He ordered the camp to attack. This was the moment the plan changed. This was the catastrophe. As the fight began, a massive psychic scream tore through the temple. It did not come from the goblins. It came from the Absolute. The entity behind the tadpoles had noticed the death of Priestess Gut. It noticed the hole in its network. It focused its entire attention on the shattered sanctum. The pressure was physical. Shadowheart fell to her knees. She screamed. Blood ran from her ears. Lae'zel dropped her sword. She clawed at her head. Gale curled into a ball. The tadpoles in their heads were resonating. The Absolute was commanding them to transform. It was activating the kill switch. The Emperor stood alone. His armor sparked. The psychic weight was immense. It was like holding up a mountain. He looked at his squad. They were dying. If they turned into Mind Flayers now, he would have to kill them. He would lose his army. He would be alone on a hostile world. He made a choice. He dropped his physical guard. He stopped fighting the goblins. He turned his back on Ragzlin. The hobgoblin swung a massive hammer. It hit the Emperor's back plate. The gold ceramite cracked. The Emperor stumbled. He did not care. He focused all his will on his companions. He did not ask them to fight. He did not encourage them. He invaded them. He thrust his mind into theirs. He wrapped his psychic will around their tadpoles. He crushed the alien signal with brute force. It was painful. Shadowheart screamed louder. It felt like a hot nail being driven into her skull. But the transformation stopped. The Emperor seized control of their motor functions. He piloted them like puppets. He forced Lae'zel to stand. He forced her to pick up her sword. Her eyes were blank, filled with a golden light. He forced Gale to cast a spell. He forced Karlach to charge. They were no longer individuals. They were extensions of the Emperor's will. The battle was brutal. The Emperor, bleeding from the crack in his armor, directed the slaughter. Puppet Lae'zel cut the legs off the hobgoblin. Puppet Karlach threw a goblin into the spider pit. Puppet Gale detonated a wave of thunder that shattered the floor. The goblins panicked. They were fighting a machine made of meat and magic. Minthara, the drow commander, came running from her chambers. She saw the golden giant. She saw the blank eyes of his soldiers. She realized this was not a skirmish. This was an extermination. She cast a spell to hold the Emperor. It failed. His mind was too occupied to be held. He walked towards her. He was slow. He was damaged. But he was inevitable. Minthara ordered her troops to focus fire. Arrows rained on the Emperor. They bounced off his pauldrons. They stuck in the gaps of his joints. He did not feel pain. He only felt the drain on his focus. Holding the minds of 5 people while fighting a war was taxing. His nose began to bleed. A single drop of golden blood hit the stone floor. He reached Minthara. She struck fast with dual maces. She was skilled. She hit his helmet. The lens of his right eye shattered. The Emperor did not flinch. He grabbed her by the throat. He lifted her up. He squeezed. He did not kill her immediately. He needed information. He ripped the location of the Moonrise Towers from her mind. He saw the army gathering there. He saw the Elder Brain. He saw the Chosen. He crushed her windpipe. She fell. The leaders were dead. The link was broken. The Emperor released his hold on the companions. They collapsed instantly. They gasped for air. They vomited. They looked at the Emperor with pure terror. They knew what he had done. He had violated their minds. He had taken away their free will. He had used them as tools. The room was quiet, save for the groans of the dying goblins. The Emperor stood in the center of the carnage. His armor was dented. His cloak was torn. He was bleeding gold. He looked at them. He did not apologize. "The threat is neutralized," he said. His voice was flat. "Secure the perimeter. Loot the bodies. We move in 1 hour." Shadowheart looked at him. She was shaking. she realized that the worm in her head was not the scariest thing in the room. The Golden Man was worse. He was a tyrant, and he was the only reason they were still alive. The Emperor walked to the statue of Saloon. He looked at the moon goddess. He spat blood on the floor. Weak gods, weak people. He checked his internal systems. His armor's reactor was leaking radiation. He needed repairs. He needed materials. He looked at the hole in the wall leading to the Underdark. He sensed resources down there. Rare metals, fungi, biomass. But that was for later. For now, he had to secure the surface. He walked back to his squad. They were slowly getting up. They did not look him in the eye. They obeyed, but the trust was gone. It was replaced by fear. This was acceptable. The Imperium was built on fear. Fear ensured compliance. Compliance ensured survival. Suddenly, the ground shook. A roar echoed from outside. The goblins were not the only threat. The ogres the Emperor had bypassed were now awake, and they were hungry. The Emperor reloaded his bolt gun. He had 4 rounds left. He drew his flaming sword. The fire was dim, but it still burned. "Form up," he ordered. They formed up. They were broken, bleeding, and traumatized, but they stood in line. The Emperor took the lead. He kicked open the heavy oak doors of the temple. The sun hit his ruined armor. He marched out to meet the next wave. The crusade continued. There was no rest. There was only war. The ogres died fast. They were big targets. The Emperor did not waste his bolt rounds. He used the environment. He lured them into the narrow doorway of the temple. They got stuck. He cut their tendons. Karlach finished them off with her axe. She was crying while she did it. She was still shaken from the mind control. The battle was over. The courtyard was silent. The Emperor ordered the looting to begin. Every scrap of metal, every coin, every potion was collected. He made the companions carry the weight. They were like pack mules. Gale complained about his back. The Emperor told him that pain was a sign of life. They marched back to the Emerald Grove. It was night. The refugees were waiting. They heard the news. The goblin leaders were dead. Zevlor cheered. The tieflings brought out wine. They wanted to celebrate. They wanted to dance. The Emperor walked into the center of the camp. He fired 1 shot into the air. The sound was like a thunderclap. The music stopped. The dancing stopped. The Emperor climbed onto the stone dais. He looked down at them. He did not smile. He told them there would be no celebration. He explained the new reality. The death of the goblins created a power vacuum. The absolute army would come to investigate. Leaving now was suicide. The road to Baldur's Gate was not safe. He declared martial law. The refugees were no longer refugees. They were now citizens of the Imperium. They were conscripts. Zevlor argued. He said they had a deal. The Emperor looked at Zevlor. He explained that the deal was for their survival. Survival required labor. He ordered the tieflings to start fortifying the grove. They would build walls. They would forge weapons. They would not run. They would hold the line. Will stepped forward. The Blade of Frontiers was angry. He said this was tyranny. He said these people were free. The Emperor looked at Will. He saw a man who had sold his soul to a devil. He saw a hypocrite. The Emperor asked Will a simple question. Who had killed the goblins? Was it Will, or was it the Emperor? Will fell silent. He knew the answer. The Emperor turned away. He ordered the druids to stop their chanting and start growing food crops, efficient crops, no flowers, only nutrition. That night, the Emperor rested. He sat on his stone bench. He closed his eyes. He found himself in a strange place. It was a field of stars. A person sat by a fire. It was a woman in armor. This was the dream visitor. She smiled at him. She said she was protecting him. She said she was holding back the transformation. The Emperor looked at her. He analyzed the psychic construct. He saw the lies. He saw the manipulation. He did not sit by the fire. He stood over her. He told her to drop the mask. He knew she was inside the prism. He knew she was a prisoner too. He told her that he did not need a guardian. He needed a servant. If she failed to protect him, he would find a way to break the prism and destroy her. The dream visitor's smile faded. She looked afraid. She realized this human was not like the others. He could not be seduced. He could only be negotiated with. She nodded. She agreed to maintain the shield. The Emperor woke up. The next morning, Lae'zel demanded they move. She said her people, the Githyanki, had a cure. It was a machine called the Isk. It was located at a creche nearby. The Emperor considered this. He did not believe in the cure. Xenos did not give gifts. But he knew the Githyanki had advanced technology. They had weapons. They had maps. He agreed to go, not for the cure, but for the conquest. They left the grove under the command of Zevlor. The Emperor gave Zevlor a strict schedule. If the walls were not 5 feet higher when he returned, Zevlor would be executed. The party traveled west. They reached the mountain pass. The air was thin. The wind was cold. They saw a massive monastery built into the cliff. It was beautiful and ruined. Rosy Morn Monastery. The Emperor scanned the structure. He saw heat signatures. Githyanki warriors. They were guarding the basement. The group entered the ruins. They fought wild animals, giant eagles, kobolds. The Emperor killed them with mechanical precision. He was conserving energy. His armor was still damaged. His internal reactor was running at 60%. He needed the Githyanki supplies to make repairs. They found the entrance to the basement, a heavy door. The Emperor kicked it open. Githyanki guards shouted. They held silver swords. They demanded submission. The Emperor walked past them. He did not bow. He did not speak their language. Lae'zel tried to mediate. She told them they were kin. The guards sneered. They called her a traitor. They attacked. It was a mistake. The hallways were narrow. The Githyanki could not use their jumping ability. The Emperor was a wall of gold. He used his sword to block. He used his fist to crush. He grabbed a Githyanki by the throat and used him as a shield against crossbow fire. The fight was brutal and short. The hallway was slick with alien blood. The Emperor stepped over the bodies. He checked their gear. He took a silver sword. It was well made. He handed it to Lae'zel. He told her to use it. She looked at the dead bodies of her people. She looked at the Emperor. She took the sword. They reached the infirmary. The doctor, Gustil Stonigos, was there. She saw Lae'zel. She saw the tadpole infection. She offered the cure. She pointed to the machine. The Isk. The Emperor looked at the device. He understood its design instantly. It was not a medical device. It was an extraction device. It was designed to kill the patient and harvest the parasite's memories. It was a trap. He told Lae'zel to stand down. She refused. She wanted to believe. She sat in the chair. The machine clamped down. It began to scream. Lae'zel screamed. Her mind was being ripped apart. The doctor watched with cold eyes. The Emperor did not panic. He walked to the machine. He gripped the metal restraints. The hydraulics whined. The metal bent. He ripped the chair open with raw strength. He pulled Lae'zel out. She was smoking. She was brain damaged but alive. The doctor tried to lock the door. The Emperor threw a metal tray at her. It hit her head. She fell. The Emperor looked at Lae'zel. He told her the truth. There was no cure. Her queen had lied. Lae'zel was weeping. Her entire worldview was shattering. The Emperor did not comfort her. He told her to focus. Anger was useful. Despair was useless. They moved deeper. They reached the captain's quarters. Kithrak Terezin stood there with her wolves. She had an object on her desk. It was a crystal, a shard of something powerful. She refused to let them pass to the Inquisitor. She attacked. The wolves charged. Shadowheart used her shield to bash a wolf. Astarion stabbed the captain in the back. The Emperor decapitated the captain. He took the crystal. It was a key. He opened the barrier. They entered the Inquisitor's chamber. It was a large platform over a void. Inquisitor Vargas was waiting. He was arrogant. He demanded the artifact. He said Queen Vlaakith wanted it. The Emperor walked to the center of the room. He held the prism. He felt the entity inside panic. The Emperor looked at the Inquisitor. He asked a question. Why does a god need a box? If Vlaakith is all-powerful, why is she afraid? The Inquisitor drew his sword. He called the Emperor a heretic. The battle began. The Inquisitor used psionic magic. He summoned duplicate weapons. He teleported. The Emperor was slower, but he was tougher. He ignored the cuts. He ignored the magic missiles. He walked through the fire. He grabbed the Inquisitor's arm. He broke it. He took the Inquisitor's sword. He drove it through the alien's chest. The room fell silent. Then, a massive hologram appeared. It was Vlaakith, the Lich Queen. She was huge. She looked down at them like ants. She was furious. She demanded the Emperor kneel. She promised him power. She promised him an empire. The Emperor looked up at the projection. He laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. He told her he already had an empire. He told her she was just a corpse on a throne. He told her she was a Xenos witch. Vlaakith screamed. Her face twisted. She began to cast a spell. She was using a wish spell. She spoke the words to end them. The Emperor reacted instantly. He did not use magic. He used logic. A hologram could not cast a spell. She was projecting from somewhere else. The energy had to travel. He raised the prism. He used it as a shield. The magical energy hit the prism and scattered. The room shook. The connection broke. The hologram vanished. But the base was on alert. The entire army was coming. They were trapped. The Emperor looked at the statue of Lathander in the corner. He had seen the secret door earlier. He knew what was downstairs. He had read the notes in the monastery. There was a weapon, the blood of Lathander, a mace made of sun. But more importantly, the mechanism that held it was a solar lance. He ordered the squad to run. He told them to get to the roof. They did not argue. They ran. The Emperor went down to the secret chamber. He solved the puzzle in seconds. He walked through the traps. He found the mace. It was floating in a beam of light. He did not disarm the safety mechanism. He grabbed the mace. He ripped it from the pedestal. The alarm screamed. The monastery began to collapse. The solar lance activated. It was a weapon designed to destroy undead, but it was also a bomb. The Emperor ran. He moved faster than he had ever moved on this world. The walls were crumbling. The laser began to fire. It shot a beam of pure sun into the sky. Then the beam widened. It began to melt the stone. The Emperor burst onto the roof. The squad was waiting near the giant eagle's nest. The eagles were attacking them. The Emperor ignored the birds. He grabbed Gale. He grabbed Shadowheart. He threw them toward the edge of the cliff. He ordered Lae'zel to jump. She jumped. The Emperor jumped last. Behind them, the monastery exploded. The solar weapon fired a blast that turned the stone to glass. The creche was vaporized. The egg hatchery, the training rooms, the warriors, all gone. A mushroom cloud of white light rose into the air. The shockwave hit them in mid-air. It threw them into the valley below. They landed in the river. The water broke their fall. They washed up on the muddy bank. They were alive. They looked back at the mountain. The monastery was gone. There was only a glowing crater. The Emperor stood up. He dripped water and mud. He held the mace, the blood of Lathander, in his hand. It glowed with a holy light. It was a power weapon, a fitting tool. Lae'zel vomited water. She looked at the crater. She had just watched her people die. She looked at the Emperor. He had destroyed them without hesitation. "You killed them all," she whispered. The Emperor looked at her. "I denied the enemy an asset," he said. "That is war." He looked at the mace. He felt its power. It was real. It was not warp magic. It was fusion technology disguised as magic. He could work with this. He clipped it to his belt. He looked at the map. The Kresh was destroyed. The Githyanki threat in this region was neutralized. Now the path to Moonrise Towers was open. But they could not go through the mountain pass. The radiation from the blast was too high. They would have to go through the Underdark. He turned to the group. They were battered. They were terrified. But they were alive. He saw a change in them. They were no longer adventurers. They were survivors. They were hardening. Even Gale looked different. The wizard was staring at the destruction with a mix of horror and scientific curiosity. "We move," the Emperor said. "The Underdark awaits." He led them to the goblin camp entrance again. They walked past the rotting bodies of the goblins they had killed days ago. The smell was bad. The Emperor did not care. He descended into the dark. The Underdark was a massive cavern system. It was full of monsters. Drow, Dorgar, fungi. The Emperor switched his vision to thermal. The dark was not a problem for him. He saw heat signatures in the distance. A minotaur. It was pacing. The Emperor signaled for silence. He analyzed the terrain. Large mushrooms, sheer drops. It was a tactical nightmare, but it was also a resource-rich environment. He saw glowing crystals, susa bark, anti-magic flowers. He formulated a plan. He would not just cross the Underdark. He would harvest it. He needed adamantine. He had read about the adamantine forge in the Drow records. His armor was failing. He needed to reforge it. He would find this forge. He would kill the Guardian. He would make himself new plating. They walked for hours. They reached a Myconid colony. The mushroom people were wary. Their leader, Spore, communicated telepathically. He showed them a dead body, a Duergar. He asked for help. The Duergar were burning the fungus. They were slavers. The Emperor agreed to help, not for charity, but because the Duergar had a boat, and he needed a boat to cross the Dark Lake. The agreement was made. The Emperor looked at his squad. "Rest for 4 hours," he ordered. "Then we kill the dwarves." He sat down on a giant mushroom. He took out the Githyanki slate he had stolen from the captain. He began to decode the data. It contained troop movements. It contained star charts. It confirmed his suspicions. The Githyanki were hunting the weapon inside the prism. They were afraid of it. Why? He looked at the prism. It was quiet. The dream visitor was silent. The Emperor suspected she was recovering from the psychic battle with Vlaakith. He tapped the metal box. "I know you are listening," he said softly. "Do not think I saved you. I saved the box." He began to clean his bolter. He had 2 rounds left. He needed to manufacture ammunition. He looked at the explosive mushrooms nearby. He analyzed their chemical composition. Highly volatile, unstable, perfect. He woke Gale up. He told the wizard to start harvesting the explosive spores. Gale rubbed his eyes. He asked if it was safe. The Emperor handed him a bag. "Safety is a luxury," he said. "Firepower is a necessity." The group deep underground, surrounded by darkness and alien life. Above them, The smoke from the destroyed monastery still drifted into the sky. The Emperor had escalated the conflict. He had declared war on a god. He had glassed a mountain. And he was just getting started. The Underdark would not be a journey. It would be a strip mining operation. And the adamantine forge would burn again, not for the drow, but for the master of mankind. The boat cut through the black water of the underground lake. The Emperor stood at the bow. He did not look at the water. He looked at the massive doors of Grimforge in the distance. They were made of iron. They were dwarven make. The architecture was solid, blocky, and functional. It reminded him of the industrial sectors of Terra before the Unification Wars. It was a sign of civilization, even here in the dark. The Duergar boatman looked at the Emperor with fear. The golden giant took up too much space on the small raft. The Emperor had killed the other Duergar at the beach. He had seized the vessel. It was a simple transaction of force. Now he needed the forge. His armor was compromised. The ceramite plates were cracked from the solar lance blast. The internal servos in his left leg were grinding. He could not conquer a world in broken armor. They docked at the port. The place was full of Duergar slavers and deep gnomes working in chains. The air smelled of sulfur and misery. The Emperor stepped onto the dock. The wood creaked under his weight. A Duergar guard stepped forward to demand a toll. The Emperor ignored him. He walked straight through the guard. The dwarf was knocked into the water. The Emperor did not look back. He was not here for politics. He was here for industry. He sensed a presence behind the main debris wall. Near, a true soul of the Absolute. Near was trapped in a cave-in with poison gas. The gnomes were trying to dig him out. The Emperor analyzed the situation. Near had a moon lantern. The Emperor needed that lantern to cross the shadow-cursed lands above. Near was a resource carrier. The Emperor ordered the gnomes to move. They hesitated. He grabbed a satchel of the explosive powder Gale had harvested. He threw it at the rubble. He ignited it with a spark from his fingertip. The explosion was deafening. Rock and dust flew everywhere. The path was clear. Nair walked out of the dust. He was a drow. He was arrogant. He immediately killed a gnome slave to show his power. The Emperor watched this display. He found it wasteful. You do not destroy your own workforce for theatre. It was inefficient. Nair turned to the Emperor. He demanded loyalty. He claimed to speak for the Absolute. The Emperor walked up to Nair. He looked down at the drow. He told Nair that his command was terminated. Nair laughed. He ordered his Duergar allies to attack. The fight was confined. It was brutal. The Emperor did not have room to swing his greatsword. He used his fists. He punched Nair in the face. The drow's head snapped back. His neck broke instantly. The Emperor grabbed the moon lantern from Nair's belt. He crushed the spider contained inside. He released the pixie. The pixie was annoying. She offered a blessing. The Emperor accepted the tactical buff and dismissed the creature. He looked at the remaining Duergar. They dropped their weapons. They knew when they were beaten. The Emperor announced that this facility was now under Imperial management. He left the squad to guard the dock. He went alone to the lower levels. He had to find the ancient forge. He descended the broken stairs. He jumped across lava flows. The heat was intense. His armor's heat regulation systems screamed warnings. He ignored them. He reached the adamantine forge. It was a massive machine suspended over a lake of magma. It was beautiful. It was the apex of local engineering. He found the mold for splint armor. He inserted it into the chamber. He found the mithril ore he had mined earlier. He loaded the crucible. He pulled the lever. The massive hammer descended. The forge hissed. But then the Guardian awoke. Grim. A massive golem made of adamantine. It rose from the lava. It was indestructible. The Emperor analyzed the threat. Physical attacks would not work. The golem was too hard. Heat would soften it. The hammer would crush it. He needed to lure the construct to the center. The Emperor stood on the anvil. He was the bait. Grim charged. The ground shook. The golem swung a fist like a wrecking ball. The Emperor caught the fist. The impact drove his boots into the metal floor. His servos whined. He was strong, but the golem was stronger. He held the line for 2 seconds. That was enough. He reached out with his mind. He pulled the lava valve lever remotely. Magma flooded the floor. Grim's legs began to glow red. The metal was softening. The Emperor rolled out of the way. He triggered the hammer lever. The massive piston slammed down. Bam! The sound was like a planet cracking. Grim was flattened. The golem tried to rise. The Emperor hit the lever again. Bam! And again. Bam! The golem was scrapped. The Emperor removed the new armor from the mold. It was dark blue. It shimmered with a strange oil. It was adamantine. He stripped off his ruined golden plates. He bolted the new metal onto his undersuit. It was heavy. It was cold. He looked at his reflection in the dark metal. He was no longer the Golden Emperor. He was the Iron Emperor. This suited the war better. He returned to the squad. They saw his new armor. They saw the dark metal. They felt the shift in his aura. He looked less like a savior and more like a tank. "We move," he said. They took the elevator up. They rose out of the dark and into the shadow. The shadow-cursed lands were a nightmare. The trees were dead. The darkness was alive. It tried to eat them. But the Emperor had the pixie's blessing. And more than that, he had his own psychic light. He shone in the dark. The shadows recoiled from him. He was anathema to them. He was order. They were chaos. They found a group of harpers. They were fighting shadows. The Emperor intervened. He did not save them out of kindness. He saved them to acquire intelligence. The harpers were led by Lysandra. She told them about Last Light Inn. She told them about Jaheira. The name meant nothing to him, but the rank High Harper meant she was a local warlord. He needed to meet her. They arrived at the inn. It was a bubble of light in a sea of dark. A magical shield protected it. The Emperor analyzed the shield. It was powered by a single psyker, a cleric named Isabel. She was the linchpin. If she fell, the base fell. This was a tactical weakness. Centralized failure points were dangerous. He entered the inn. Jaheira stopped him. Vines grew from the floor to block his path. She was old. She was a druid. She had seen many wars. She looked at the Emperor and saw a monster. He looked at her and saw a potential governor. He told her to stand aside. He told her he was here to kill Ketheric Thorm. That was the magic word. The vines receded. He walked to the bar. He ordered water. He did not drink wine. Alcohol dulled the senses. He watched the refugees. They were scared. He saw a man playing chess with Raphael the Devil. The Emperor walked over. He looked at the board. He moved a single piece. "Checkmate in 3, he said to Raphael. The Devil smiled. He was intrigued. He offered a deal. He wanted the Emperor to kill an enemy in the Gauntlet of Shah, an Orphan. In exchange, Raphael would explain the scars on Astarion's back. The Emperor did not care about Astarion's scars, but he knew that deals with devils were traps. However, removing a rival piece from the board was standard strategy. He agreed to kill the Orphan, not for Astarion, but to clear the path. Suddenly, the roof shattered. A winged man flew in. Marcus, a traitor. He had come for Isabel. Winged horrors followed him. They attacked the refugees. The Emperor did not run to save the refugees. He ran to Isabel's room. She was the shield generator. She was the priority. Marcus was trying to knock Isabel unconscious. He was fast, but the Emperor was faster. He burst through the door. Marcus looked up. He saw a giant in adamantine armor. The Emperor did not speak. He grabbed Marcus by the wing. He pulled. Wet tearing sounds filled the room. Marcus screamed. The Emperor threw him against the wall. He drew his flaming sword. He drove it through Marcus's chest. The traitor died instantly. The Emperor turned to Isabel. She was trembling. She was casting a spell to keep the shield up. The Emperor put a hand on her shoulder. "Maintain the field," he ordered. "Panic is death." His voice was steady. It anchored her. She nodded. The shield held. The horrors outside burned in the light. The attack failed. Jaheira came running in. She saw the dead traitor. She saw the Emperor standing guard. She realized he was effective. She did not like him, but she needed him. The Emperor told her to secure her perimeter. Her security was lax. He gave her a list of improvements. She took the list. The next phase was the assault on Moonrise. But first, they had to make Ketheric Thorm mortal. He was invincible. Jaheira said his power came from a relic in the Thorm mausoleum. The Emperor consulted his map. The mausoleum was an entrance to a temple, the Gauntlet of Shah. They marched to the mausoleum. Raphael met them outside. He warned them about the dangers. The Emperor walked past him. He entered the temple. It was vast. It was dedicated to the goddess of loss and darkness. The Emperor hated it. It was a monument to defeatism. They found the Orthan Jögr. He was a massive devil. He was invisible. He was hunting them. The Emperor switched to thermal vision again. He saw the heat shimmer of the devil on the upper ledge. He did not negotiate. He did not play Jögr's game. He ordered Gale to cast a wide area silence spell. The devil could not give orders to his minions. The Emperor charged. He jumped a 20-foot gap. He landed on the invisible devil. The impact broke the invisibility. Jögr roared. The Emperor hammered him with the blood of Lathander. The sun mace burned the devil's flesh. Karlach and Lae'zel handled the minions. It was a slaughter. The Orthan died. Raphael appeared. He was pleased. He revealed the information about Astarion's scars. They were a contract, a ritual to make a vampire ascendant. The Emperor filed this information away. A vampire ascendant could be a powerful weapon, or a powerful threat. He would decide Astarion's fate later. They went deeper. They faced the trials of Shah. These were tests of faith. The soft step trial, the self-same trial, the faith leap trial. They were designed to teach humility and stealth. The Emperor failed them all on purpose. He did not sneak. He walked through the traps. He triggered the statues. He took the damage. He healed himself. He brute forced the locks. He proved that will was stronger than faith. Shadowheart was quiet. This was her goddess. She was supposed to become a dark justiciar. She was supposed to kill the Night Song. The Emperor watched her. He saw the doubt. He saw the memories surfacing. She was not a killer by nature. She was a healer who had been brainwashed. They reached the inner sanctum. They found Balthazar. The necromancer was floating on a pile of corpses. He was grotesque. He worked for Ketheric. He was guarding the relic. The Emperor looked at Balthazar. He saw a man who perverted science with magic. "Your experiments are crude," the Emperor said. Balthazar sneered. He summoned his undead army. Giant skeletons rose from the piles of bone. The Emperor was surrounded. He did not blink. He raised the blood of Lathander. He activated the sunbeam. A line of holy fire cut through the room. It vaporized the skeletons. It hit Balthazar. The necromancer screamed. His flesh boiled. The Emperor walked through the fire. He grabbed Balthazar's face. He crushed it. The way was open. They stepped into the Shadowfell. Gravity was strange here. Rocks floated in the void. At the center, trapped in a magical circle, was a woman. She had wings. She was glowing. This was not an object. This was an Asima, a daughter of a moon goddess, Dame Aelin, the Night Song. She was the source of Ketheric's immortality. He was siphoning her power to heal himself. Shadowheart stepped forward. She held the Spear of Night. She was trembling. She had to kill the Asima to fulfill her destiny, to become the chosen of Shah. The Night Song looked at Shadowheart. She spoke of Shadowheart's past. She spoke of wolves. The Emperor stepped between them. This was the pivot point, the small choice. In a normal timeline, a hero might appeal to Shadowheart's good nature. They might talk about friendship. The Emperor did not do this. He analyzed the strategic board. If Shadowheart killed the Night Song, Shah gains a powerful agent. The Shadow Curse remains. Ketheric becomes vulnerable, but the Emperor loses the Aasimar as an asset. The region becomes a stronghold of Shah. Shah is chaos. Chaos is the enemy. If Shadowheart spared the Night Song, Ketheric becomes vulnerable. The Aasimar is freed. She is a potent combat unit. Shah loses a pawn. The Shadow Curse can be lifted. The logic was absolute. The Night Song was more valuable alive. The Emperor looked at Shadowheart. His eyes were burning gold. He did not ask. He commanded. "Stand down, soldier," the Emperor said. "The asset is to be recovered, not destroyed." Shadowheart looked at him. She looked at the spear. "But, my Lady Shah, she demands it." "Your lady is a parasite," the Emperor stated. "She feeds on your loss. The Imperium feeds on victory. Do you want to be a victim or a victor?" He pointed at the Night Song. "She is a weapon against the Absolute. We do not break our own weapons." He projected his will into Shadowheart's mind. He did not mind control her this time. He showed her the truth. He showed her the tactical map. He showed her Ketheric falling. He showed her the logic. Shadowheart screamed. She threw the spear into the void. She rejected Shah, not out of love, but out of realization. She had been used. She approached the Night Song. She placed her hands on the prison. The Emperor added his strength. He smashed the magical bonds with his adamantine gauntlet. The glass shattered. Dame Aelin was free. She roared. Her wings spread. Full armor materialized on her body. She was glorious. She was a Primarch in her own right. She looked at the Emperor. She nodded. "Game recognized game. My sword is yours, Golden One," she said. "Ketheric will die." She took off. She flew straight up, out of the Shadowfell. She was a cruise missile of holy light aimed directly at Moonrise Towers. The Emperor watched her go. He turned to Shadowheart. She was crying. Her hair had turned white. The stress had changed her. "Regroup," the Emperor said. "She will begin the assault. We must support the vanguard." They left the Shadowfell. The atmosphere had changed. The Shadow Curse was weakening. The darkness was retreating. The Emperor marched them back to the inn. Jaheira was waiting. She saw the beam of light in the sky. She knew the time had come. "The Night Song flies," Jaheira said. "The harpers are ready." The Emperor looked at the map of Moonrise Towers. He pointed to the bridge. "We do not sneak," the Emperor said. "We assault the main gate. I will draw their fire. You will flank." He looked at his squad. Lae'zel was sharpening her silver sword. Karlach was revving her engine heart. Gale was preparing his war spells. Will was summoning his pact blade. Shadowheart was silent, but her eyes were clear. She was no longer a Sharon. She was an Imperial asset. The Emperor checked his bolt gun. He had crafted 10 rounds from the explosive powder, 10 shots, 10 kills. "Fall in," he ordered. They marched south. The road to Baldur's Gate lay through the tower. Ketheric Thorm was an obstacle, and obstacles were to be removed. The Emperor felt a twinge in his mind. The Elder Brain was reacting. It felt the loss of the Night Song. It felt the approach of the anathema. It was afraid. The Emperor led the way. His adamantine armor absorbed the dim light. He was a dark titan of industry and war. The Crusade had entered its final phase in the Cursed Lands. The siege of Moonrise was about to begin. The bridge to Moonrise Towers was a choke point. The Harpers charged across it. They were brave, but bravery was not armor. The forces of the Absolute held the other side. Undead soldiers, zealots, and ghouls formed a wall of flesh and steel. The Harpers died in droves. Arrows rained down. Magic blasts tore through the ranks. Jaheira shifted into a panther and leaped into the fray, but she was just one beast against an army. The assault was stalling. The Emperor watched from the rear. He analyzed the kill ratios. The Harpers were trading 10 lives for 1 enemy kill. This was inefficient. It was wasteful. He stepped forward. He did not run. He walked with the heavy, rhythmic thud of adamantine boots. He passed the cowering refugees who had taken up arms. He passed the dead bodies of the scouts. He reached the front line. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and rotting meat. He raised his bolter. He had 10 rounds. He selected his targets. He did not shoot the foot soldiers. He shot the commanders. He saw a black gauntlet shouting orders. He squeezed the trigger. The commander's head vanished in a red mist. The enemy line faltered. Chaos spread. The Emperor drew the blood of Lathander. The mace glowed with the light of a star. In the shadow-cursed darkness, it was blinding. The undead soldiers recoiled. They burned. The Emperor swung. He smashed rib cages. He shattered skulls. He was a machine of war. Dame Aelin, the Night Song, dropped from the sky like a meteor. She landed in the middle of the enemy formation. She was invincible. She laughed as she fought. She was the hammer. The Emperor was the anvil. They crushed the enemy between them. They breached the main gate. The main hall of Moonrise was a slaughterhouse. Zorel, the Orc commander, stood at the top of the stairs. She used black hole magic to pull the Harpers together. Then her mages blasted them with fire. The Emperor saw the tactical disadvantage. He signaled Gale. He projected a command. Counterspell. Gale obeyed. He wove a web of magic that unraveled Zorel's spell. The gravity well collapsed. The Harpers scattered. The Emperor charged up the stairs. He did not use the stairs like a man. He jumped. His powered armor propelled him 15 feet into the air. He landed in front of Zorel. She looked surprised. She tried to swing her axe. The Emperor caught the haft of the axe in his left hand. He crushed the wood. He drove his fist into her face. She fell. He did not finish her. He let Karlach do it. Karlach was raging. She wanted blood. The Emperor allowed her to vent. Morale was a resource. They cleared the tower floor by floor. The resistance was stiff but broken. The Emperor's presence suppressed the enemy. The cultists looked at him and felt fear. They felt the weight of a true authority. Their belief in the Absolute wavered in the face of the Imperium. They reached the top floor. The door to the roof was heavy iron. The Emperor kicked it open. Ketheric Thorm was waiting. He stood on the edge of the tower. The massive tentacles of the Elder Brain writhed in the background. Ketheric looked tired. He was an old man in heavy armor. He had died before. He was ready to die again, but he would not yield. He looked at the Emperor. He spoke of Isabel. He spoke of his wife. He tried to justify his evil with love. The Emperor walked closer. He did not listen to the speech. He did not care about Ketheric's tragedy. Emotions were irrelevant to the strategic reality. The Emperor spoke one sentence. He told Ketheric that his logic was flawed. Surrender was the only statistical viability. Ketheric laughed. It was a sad sound. He said he could not surrender. He was bound to his god. Dame Aelin landed on the roof. She screamed a challenge. She attacked Ketheric. The two immortals clashed. Sparks flew. Ketheric was strong. He was powered by the god of death, Merkel. He knocked Aelin back. He turned to the Emperor. He raised his hammer. The Emperor blocked with his mace. The impact shook the tower. The stone cracked under their feet. Suddenly, the massive tentacle behind the tower lashed out. It grabbed Dame Aelin. It grabbed Ketheric. It did not distinguish between friend and foe. The floor collapsed. The Emperor fell. He fell into the hollow center of the tower. He fell into the dark. He landed in a pool of brine. The smell was overpowering. It smelled of ammonia and raw biology. He stood up. His armor system cycled. He was deep underground. This was the Mind Flayer colony. The walls were not made of stone. They were made of flesh. They pulsed. Veins ran along the floor. It was a living organism. The Emperor felt a wave of disgust. This was Xenos corruption in its purest form. It reminded him of the Tyranid hive ships. It had to be burned, all of it. He gathered his squad. They were shaken. They looked at the fleshy walls with horror. The Emperor told them to focus. Horror was a distraction. They moved through the colony. They found pods. Inside were people, civilians, soldiers from the Grove. They were being processed. They were being turned into Mind Flayers. The Emperor paused. He looked at the control panel. There was a lever to purge the pods, to kill the occupants before they turned. Will pleaded to save them. He said there might be a cure. The Emperor looked at the pods. He saw the tadpoles eating the brains inside. There was no cure. To let them live was to allow more enemies to spawn. He pulled the purge lever. The pods flooded with acid. The people inside died instantly. Will screamed in horror. The Emperor walked away. He told Will that mercy to the enemy was treason to humanity. They found Zevlor in a pod. The tiefling leader was still human. He was terrified. The Emperor released him. Zevlor fell to his knees. He apologized for failing. The Emperor did not accept the apology. He told Zevlor to pick up a sword. Redemption was found in combat. Zevlor nodded. He joined the formation. They reached the center of the colony. A massive elevator led down to the neural switchboard. The Emperor sensed the psychic pressure increasing. It was like walking into a storm. The Elder Brain was close. The Emperor activated his mental shields. He extended the protection to his squad. They stopped clutching their heads. They stepped off the elevator. They saw a vast chamber. In the center was a pool of brine, and rising from it was the Elder Brain. But it was not free. It was wearing a crown, a massive metal crown with 3 gems, the crown of Karsus. The Emperor recognized the design. It was Netherese. It was ancient human technology. It was archaeotech. It was the same level of technology as the Dark Age of technology on Terra. Someone had enslaved the brain. Beneath the brain stood 3 figures: Ketheric Thorm, Ember Gortash, Orin the Red, the chosen of the dead 3. They were arguing. Gortash was a man in a fine coat. He looked like a politician. Orin was a woman in skin armor. She was twitching. She was a psychopath. The Emperor analyzed them. Gortash was the brains. Ketheric was the muscle. Orin was the wild card. Gortash was holding the command over the brain. He was using the crown to force the monster to obey. The Emperor felt a flicker of respect. To enslave a godlike entity required will, but Gortash was using it for petty power. He wanted to rule a city. The Emperor wanted to rule the species. The three villains noticed the intruders. Gortash smiled. He congratulated the Emperor on making it this far. He offered a partnership. He said they could rule together. The Emperor did not answer. He did not negotiate with terrorists. Ketheric stepped forward. He was broken. He was tired of the game. Orin laughed and transformed into a slayer form for a second, then back. Gortash realized the Emperor would not talk. He commanded the brain to attack, but the brain hesitated. It was struggling against the crown. Gortash and Orin decided to leave. They had the army to lead. They left Ketheric to finish the job. They took the Netherstones with them. Ketheric was left alone. He looked at the Emperor. "My Lord Merkel," Ketheric whispered. "I am yours." Ketheric threw himself into the brine pool. The liquid bubbled. It turned black. A massive skeletal form rose from the depths. It was huge. It had a side the size of a building. It was the avatar of Merkel, the Lord of Bones, a god made manifest. The squad panicked. Gale shouted that this was impossible. Shadowheart prayed. Lae'zel gripped her sword until her knuckles were white. The Emperor stepped forward. He did not look up at the giant skeleton. He looked it in the eye. "You are a fiction," the Emperor said. His voice was amplified by his armor. "You are a warp entity feeding on fear. I deny you." The avatar roared. It swung the scythe. The Emperor did not dodge. He raised the blood of Lathander. He channeled every ounce of his psychic power into the mace. He created a telekinetic shield. The scythe hit the shield. The sound shattered the glass in the room. The Emperor slid back 10 feet, digging trenches in the floor with his boots. But he stood. "Attack," he ordered. The battle was a war of attrition. The Avatar summoned necromites. It healed itself by eating the dead. The Emperor identified the mechanic. He ordered Shadowheart to burn the bones, deny the enemy resources. She cast spirit guardians. She ran through the piles of bones, turning them to ash. Karlach and Lae'zel climbed the fleshy platforms. They attacked the Avatar's flanks. There were ants biting a giant, but they drew its attention. The Avatar swatted at them. This gave the Emperor an opening. He saw the chest of the Avatar. It was open. Inside, Ketheric's heart was exposed. It was the weak point. The Emperor holstered his mace. He grabbed a Mind Flayer brine tank. It was heavy, explosive. He hurled it at the Avatar using telekinesis. The tank hit the chest cavity. Gale, fire. Gale cast a fireball. It hit the tank. The explosion happened inside the Avatar's ribcage. The god screamed. The bones cracked. The Avatar fell to its knees. The Emperor walked up the ramp. He stood eye level with a massive skull. He drew his sword. The flames on the blade were white hot. "There are no gods," the Emperor said. "There is only the Imperium." He plunged the sword into the Avatar's neck. He twisted. The connection to the warp was severed. The skeleton crumbled. It turned to dust and black slime. Ketheric Thorm's body fell out of the wreckage. He was dead. Truly dead this time. The room was silent. The Elder Brain loomed above them. It was watching. The Emperor walked to Ketheric's body. He saw a stone glowing in the armor. The Netherstone. He picked it up. It was warm. It pulsed with power. The Emperor felt a presence in his mind. It was the brain. It spoke to him. It offered him power. It told him that with the 3 stones, he could dominate the universe. The dream visitor appeared in his mind. She screamed at him to destroy the brain. She said it was too dangerous. The Emperor looked at the massive brain. He looked at the crown of Karsus. He saw the potential. This was a supercomputer, It was a psychic amplifier. In the hands of a novice like Gortash, it was a weapon of terror. In the hands of the master of mankind, it could be a beacon. It could be the Astronomicon of this world. But not yet. He only had one stone. He needed the other two. He looked at the dream visitor. "Silence," he commanded. "I do not destroy assets. I acquire them." He turned to his squad. They were battered. They were bleeding. But they were victorious. They looked at him with awe. He had killed a god. He had proven his doctrine. "The immediate threat is neutralized," the Emperor announced. "But the war is not over. Gortash and Orin have fled to Baldur's Gate. They have the army." He walked to the exit. He did not look back at the brain. He knew it would wait. It was trapped by the crown. It was his prize waiting to be claimed. They took the elevator to the surface. The sun was rising. The light hit the towers of Moonrise. The battle was over. The harpers were cheering. They had won. Jaheira ran up to them. She looked at the Emperor. She saw the netherstone in his hand. She realized that power had just shifted hands, not disappeared. "Ketheric is dead?" she asked. "Executed," the Emperor replied. "And the army?" "Leaderless. They will scatter. We will hunt them down." The Emperor looked north. He could see the river winding towards the city. Baldur's Gate. It was a hive of scum and villainy. It was corrupt. It was inefficient. It was ruled by weak men and monsters. It was perfect. He turned to the assembled forces, the tieflings, the harpers, the fist soldiers who had defected. There were hundreds of them. They were a ragtag mob, but they had seen him kill a god. They believed. "Listen to me," the Emperor's voice boomed over the courtyard. "Today you fought for survival. Tomorrow you fight for order. This world is broken. Its gods are petty tyrants. Its kings are fools. I offer you a new path." He pointed his sword at the north. "We march on Baldur's Gate. We will root out the corruption. We will hang the traitors. We will build a city of iron and logic. Those who join me will be the founders of a new age. Those who oppose me will be dust." The soldiers cheered. They did not cheer for freedom. They cheered for strength. They cheered because they were afraid of the dark. And the Emperor was the brightest light they had ever seen. The Emperor lowered his sword. He looked at Lae'zel. She was cleaning her blade. She nodded at him. She had forgotten Vlaakith. She had found a new warlord. He looked at Shadowheart. She was holding her head high. She was no longer a slave to Shah. She was a soldier of the Imperium. He looked at Gale. The wizard was calculating the magical potential of the crown. He was useful. "Form up," the Emperor ordered. "We leave in 1 hour." He walked towards the bridge. His armor was scarred. His cape was burnt. But he was unbroken. He checked his internal chronometer. The campaign was proceeding ahead of schedule. The conquest of Faerun was inevitable. The Emperor of mankind did not play games. He did not roll dice. He simply imposed his will upon reality until reality broke. He took the first step onto the road to Baldur's Gate. The ground shook. The crusade had begun. The sun rose over the towers of Moonrise, but it did not look like a morning of victory. It looked like a morning of work. The battlefield was silent. There were no songs being sung by the harpers. There was no drinking. The Emperor had forbidden it. Instead, there was the sound of hammers. The refugees were stripping the armor off the dead cultists. They were melting down the metal to make nails and plates. The dead bodies were piled into great heaps and burned. The smoke rose into the sky in a straight black pillar. It was efficient. It prevented disease. Withers stood by the riverbank. The ancient skeleton scribe held his heavy book. He dipped his quill into a pot of ink. He had watched the realms of men and gods for thousands of years. He had seen heroes rise and fall. He had seen the wheel of fate turn. But this was different. The wheel was not turning. The Golden Man had grabbed the wheel and broken it. Withers wrote in his book. He did not write about a party of adventurers. He wrote about the founding of the First Legion. He noted that the concept of fate was no longer applicable. The variable was now will. Inside the tower, the atmosphere was sterile. The Grand Hall was now a logistics center. Gale was not reading poetry. He was supervising a production line of potion makers. He was teaching them how to refine volatile compounds. He looked tired. His eyes were dark, but he did not stop. He was an asset, and assets had quotas. Shadowheart was in the infirmary. She was not praying to Shah or Selûne. She was stitching wounds with mechanical precision. She had learned that a soldier who could not fight was a drain on resources. She saved them so they could hold a spear again. Lae'zel was in the courtyard. She was drilling the tieflings. She hit a man with the flat of her blade because he stumbled. The man did not complain. He stood up and held the line. They were no longer afraid of the dark. They were afraid of failing the Emperor. This fear made them strong. They were becoming a cohesive unit. They were learning the discipline of the stars. The Emperor stood alone in Ketheric Solar. He had cleared the room of the necromantic furniture. He had set up a large table. On it was a map of Baldur's Gate. He placed small stone markers on the map, one for the foundry, one for the Worm's Rock Fortress, one for the upper city. He was not planning a dungeon crawl. He was planning an occupation. He calculated the population density. He calculated the food supply. He estimated that 10% of the population would resist. They would be purged. The rest would be integrated. He looked at the netherstone in his hand. It was a tool, nothing more. The gods of this world were children playing with fire. He would take the fire away. He clipped the stone to his belt. He walked to the window. He saw the road stretching north. It was a long road, but he had walked longer roads. He had walked across the galaxy. This was just one more planet to bring into compliance. He activated his Vox Grill. His voice carried over the entire camp. "The rest period is over," he stated. "Load the wagons. We march in 10 minutes. The camp began to move instantly. There was no hesitation. The machine started to turn. The Emperor of Mankind walked out of the tower. He did not look back at the ruin he had conquered. He looked forward to the next conquest. The history of Fyron had ended. The history of the Imperium had begun.